Awesome. Welcome to another episode of Fight the Burnout. Today we have a very special guest. Something I know this conversation is going to be epic because you got two ex-cops talking about burnout, talking about their experiences with things. We have Christopher Hoyer here. He was a police officer in Phoenix, Arizona for 20 years before he left, and he's going to tell us all about his story. He did neighborhood um, uh, policing. And so, before I mess anything up, because I know I probably already have, Chris, I'll let you take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey with obviously burnout and that, because I know before we talked, there was a few things that you had said about it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for the honor to be here, man. It's just awesome. So, yeah, actually, yesterday was my third year anniversary for being retired from Phoenix PD. Did my 20 years and 64 days, and that to be honest with you, the first 18 years was awesome. I had a ball, had a blast. But the last 2 years of my career, everything started to really seriously fall apart for me. And getting specifically on the burnout portion of it, it started with um, pretty much beginning of 2016 started with me basically witnessing an 8-year-old hang himself. And then fast forward, two of my buddies got into a really wicked gunfight a couple of weeks later on the same day that an investigation went sideways that shouldn't have, and a guy got let go without being arrested and ended up killing 3 people, which I took full responsibility for because I wanted the guy arrested, but I couldn't because I was writing a search warrant. He got released, and then, like I said, that turned into a mess. And then fast forward, May of 2016, I got into the wickedest, nasty gunfight you can imagine. My first gunfight, my fourth shooting, second with the rifle. It was an ambush, and an officer was killed. And that was pretty much the day that I checked out. I just didn't know that for about 2 years. It started off really bad, of course, and then it got better. I had a tremendous amount of support from my department. And after about a year of them, I'm not going to use the word coddling so much, but they pretty much were taking care of me for the most part. And then when they started realizing that I still wasn't okay, they started turning their backs on me. And then when everything went bad, it went really bad. Um, I responded to another officer involved shooting about a year later, and I had a really bad experience with that. And that's a whole long story. But the worst of the worst was on my 20th anniversary. My best friend on the department lost his dog in a deployment. And that's when I just lost my shit. I mean, I was like, all right, we're done. Had a huge blowout. I packed my desk. I walked out the door. I told my boss to kiss my ass, basically. And that was the biggest mistake I ever made in my entire career. And luckily survived that and came back full swing before I was able to honorably retire a couple of weeks later. So
Yeah.
that in a nutshell, that's pretty much what it was.
It's so funny. Like you're saying that, I'm getting goosebumps because it literally, yours was more extreme, but literally same experience with myself. Except for mine was I had a female partner of mine get assaulted. A guy haymakered her as he was trying to run out the door, trying to escape, like evade arrest from me, locking him up. And he took off. Luckily, I saw she didn't get knocked out. She was still on her feet. I took off, chased him, caught him. He got nothing for it, pretty much. And when I say nothing for it, I mean even less than what you'd get over there for it. But then mine was suicides as well, going to those, and then in the advising jobs as well. And it just, I luckily, knock on wood, didn't get in any gunfights or anything. We don't have quite the firearm stuff over here, but I can full on relate. It is, and tell me if I'm wrong, but you feel like you're a bit alone through it all?
Toward the end, I started to. In the very beginning, I, it sounds kind of weird to say it this way, but I had an escalation of use of force. So my first shooting was actually a dog shooting, which I still count because it was a fight to the death, literally. And then it was me versus bad guy, and then me versus bad guy with the rifle, and then it was a gunfight with the rifle. And so for the first three, it was all regular, when the target turns, raise and fire 2 rounds kind of a thing. And
Yeah.
got a tremendous amount of support from that, which is great. I got a much bigger response of support after my buddy David Glasser was killed. And then, like I said, as time went by, I think a lot of guys wanted to forget what happened because it was such a tragedy that, I mean, they always are, of course. But Dave was, your normal, everybody loved him kind of a thing. And, it was such a painful passing from him that people just they didn't want anything to do with it. They said, you know what, we don't want to hear any more about this. And they kind of put it on the back burner, if you will. So to answer your question, yeah, by the end of, cause that happened 2016. So by the end of 2017, it was pretty much like, yeah, we don't want to talk about this anymore. And I was still reeling. I was still very emotionally charged, you know, and seeking assistance, and I wasn't getting it anymore. So
that's quite sad to hear, because same thing, you know, you start to, and I think, even, correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, as law enforcement, we also a lot of times don't want to push it if people aren't actually there actively helping, and we're like, oh no, we're the guys who run into the gunfire, not away from it. And so I feel like, for myself at least, there was a lot of that. Not, she'll be right, I'm good, and people aren't asking me about it anymore, so it's done and dusted. We'll just leave it. Be a little bit. And then, you know, and really there's PTSD around it all, which for me caused a lot of the burnout. Because you have all that stuff, which back when I went through stuff, I was like, PTSD is just for military guys, or like, for example, you know, getting into a shooting, and I mean, you know, something happened, like that was in my mind kind of things, not this accumulative suicide things and all of that kind of stuff. But no, that's so before we continue, and I, you know, get some of the tools and stuff that you used or you've learned over the time, what do you define that burnout specifically as? Like, what, if you put your thumb on it, what do you feel that you define it as?
I would say for sure because I'm a poster child for, you know, I'm okay, I'm good, you know, you're pounding your chest, you know, you just killed a guy, you're not okay. I mean, you're gonna be okay, but at the time, you know, like I said, communicatively, it's gonna wear on you over time. And where the burnout happened for me specifically was over time. I never took care of myself emotionally. You know, I did that same thing where, you know, don't worry about me, I'm okay. You know, I'm just going to get back on the horse and go out there and fight crime and be a professional, you know, crime fighter and all this bullshit that we think is making us tough, which it isn't. It's just making you more weak.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it was. And for me, like I said, when Dave was killed, I was already pretty much here emotionally. And then when that happened, I got knocked right on my ass. Now, if I had paid more attention to the emotional toll that was building over my time, I wouldn't have been burned out nearly as quickly. And of course, I had a list of things that happened after the fact.
Yeah.
But again, if I had been more stable with my emotions, that stuff probably wouldn't have affected me quite so badly. So
yeah. Chris, what's your opinion on law enforcement, especially because we're both law enforcement, but first responders it hits as well. But I feel like law enforcement big time, almost sometimes more than even military, because we're living at 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for, like yourself, 20 years. Do you feel like over time, because of all the stuff that you see and you dealt with, and that those emotions, you struggled to reconnect with them when you'd have to shut them off at work because of a shooting, or because of dealing with the people that you can't sit there and bawl your eyes out with them because you feel like you can't because you're in that uniform, but then turning it back on when you go home?
Well, when I got hired on in 97, and I hate to say this, like back in the day, you know, because now I feel like I'm this old, that retired guy, you know, but back when I was going through, the mentality was don't share these things with your family, which I truly believe was a huge mistake, because I think that really lends itself to a lot of divorce, because let's face it, I mean, you come home and you're not telling your spouse what's going on with you at work, her wheels start turning, or his wheels start turning, or whatever it happens to be, and you're not sharing your emotions and your experiences with them. They think something else is going on, where you think that you're trying to protect them. And so I think there's a major separation between work and home that needs to be bridged on some level. Now, like in some cases, do you need to tell your wife that you know, went and kicked a guy's eyeball out? No, maybe she wants to hear the gory details. Sure, absolutely. But, you know, here's the thing. You can't walk in the door and have that look on your face of, you know, of trauma and expect her to not, or him to not respond somehow. Yeah. And as cops, as you well know, you walk in the door, how's your day? It was fine. Yeah. What's going on? Nothing. You okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Bullshit.
You shut everything down. You shut everything down.
So yeah, I mean, and what you do is you disconnect yourself from work while you're at home, but you stay disconnected while you're at home. And then, so you've got to reconnect yourself back to work when you get back to the street or whatever it is, you know. And it's very, very difficult. So I believe that in my opinion, of course, is that you really need to, and if it's not, again, it's not specific details, you just need to let her know or let him know, hey, this is what happened today. Um, can we figure out a way to process through whatever it is? That could be, that could be going on a hike. It could be going to freaking Chick-fil-A. It can be going, walk on the beach, whatever it is, just to escape the law enforcement community from just little times here and there. So
I think that's so important, especially for anybody out there that's wanting to get in law enforcement, or if you're already in, is having those things outside of law enforcement that ground you back to reality. Because I remember when I was going through all my stuff and going to counselors and all of that, doing lots of work on myself, it would get brought up all the time, and my wife would say, you see the bottom 10% of society every single day, and in turn your mind starts to think everybody is the bottom 10% of society.
Well, we're definitely jaded, untrusting machines most of the time.
Yeah.
And that's not how you start off. You start off, you're wearing your business suit and you're in the background investigator's office saying, I'll do whatever it takes. And then you realize what it takes. You're like, oh shit, I didn't know about that, kind of a thing. It does take a toll on you after a while, of course. So.
Yes, it definitely does. And I like your thing around, because it's something that I talk about a lot, and I do a lot now, even though I'm not in law enforcement, and even all the colleagues the guys that I still know, and women that are still in, I go talk about what you go to. Talk about where you go. You don't have to go into the gory details, like you said, kicking somebody's eyeball out, or breaking someone's arm on accident, whatever the gory things are, or getting the shit kicked out of you or what. But just going, today was one of those days that today, we had some really gory stuff happen, or I went to 3 suicides today, or we got in a gunfight today. And yes, you're wanting to protect your partner, but at the same time, your significant other, but at the same time, it's like you got to share that, because otherwise, like you said, they spin, or they just feel like you're shoving them away all the time.
Right. Absolutely. And I can tell you from experience that if you've come to the situation where you're living with somebody and or you're married or what have you, they probably know you pretty well. Now, when you walk in the door, they already know. They can see the look on your face and they know something's not right. And you're playing denial, like, oh, I'm good. Bullshit. No, you're not. In my case, what I quote is that, you can't go 18 years and see the worst of the worst and expect to be okay. You're not going to be okay. It doesn't have to be 18. It could be a year. It could be a day. It could be whatever it is, and again, you just got to process through these things. So,
yeah, no, you definitely do. It's one of the bigger regrets that I have, that I didn't talk to my wife and I still together. We went through everything and came out stronger. But it's one of the things that I wish I had done more, is tell her more of the stuff that I was dealing with.
Right.
So that not that she could relate her, but just so that she could be there and be like, okay, I get that you're going through stuff, sweet. Instead of just going, not, and then shove her away.
Because then what does she think? She probably thinks you're screwing her behind her back, or you're
whatever stories come up for her, or she just is like, you're disconnected. Why are you not here? Like, what? You're not you. Like, she, I remember at one stage, she was like, you're not who I married.
I've heard that so many times. I can't even tell you. So
yeah. So Chris, so you obviously went through a lot of it. You, just like most of us that go through it, didn't recognize it straight away. What have you learned now that you've gone through it, and what have you learned from it that, like, maybe you still do, but also, I guess most importantly for the listeners in that, or even for yourself, what would you say to somebody, or say to yourself back when you were going through it, so that you could try and identify it earlier?
Well, it's kind of strange, because we all hear the same thing when we first start. You should write a story for whatever event you happen to get involved with that particular day. And what I figured out later on was about a year and a half after Dave was killed, I started writing a book. Yeah. And for me, that was a beautiful thing, because I expressed all those emotions, but it was obviously way, way too late. But if you get that stuff out early on, and you process through those things earlier on, and like you said, I know obviously you and I ride motorcycles. That's what I would do. I would hop on the bike and I'd be gone, and I would go off and I would just find what I refer to as my God spots. It'd be either on the beach or in the woods or what have you. But what I realized also that was very important to point out was I didn't know that what I was doing was I was getting on the bike and I was going and I was escaping all of the shit that I had to deal with all the day. Problem was I was just putting it on hold. I wasn't processing through things, you know what I mean? So when I came back, it was all still there. So what I figured out later on was that when I'm on my rides, there's nobody to argue with me except for me. So, I mean, I had a pencil and paper and I would stop on the side of the road and I would actually write questions down that I would have to ask myself later and face those questions. And if it was something that I wasn't sure about, that, you know, I mean, let's face it, you got to have the mentality and the maturity to be able to say, you know what, I can't handle this. Somebody help me over here. You know what I mean? So I would do that. I'd write these things down and I'd come back and then I would, you know, either get with my family or coworkers or my shrink or whatever it was and go, hey, you know, how do I deal with this right here? You know, and face that thing head on, you know, and if I had known that 20 years ago, I would have probably been a lot better off. So
I think that's a good thing. And you said a few good things there around, you know, facing it head on. As first responders and cops, especially, you know, or even military, we're trained to hit things head on. But when it comes to us, we skirt around them and we're like, how do we get around this? I don't want to deal with that. Let's get around it. You don't head it straight on. If we take the training that we learn at academy and police college and that, or even, you know, what we think is there for viewers that aren't in first responder, if you do take those things head on and you go, hey, I'm going to deal with this, let's conquer this, you'll actually learn a lot more.
I got a very close friend who's still in the department, and he says it best. You know, I can't say it as good as he does, but basically what he says is, why is it as cops we can ask for support on the street, but we can't ask for support at home? I'm like, dude, that's brilliant. I mean, because that's absolutely true. All day long, hey, I need a backup. I need a backup. I need a backup. And then you get home and you're like, I'm good. The fuck you are? You're not good. You're a disaster because you can't go through stuff that we see. You know, like in my case, watching an 8-year-old hang himself. If that doesn't screw you up, man, I mean, come on, let's face it, that you're probably not okay already.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, you know, you see a lot of stuff, you know, there's a lot of cops in the States, and I feel really, you know, sorry, you know, really bad for the bad rap that the media and everything gives police in the state. But I do see some of those like videos in that, like, you know, take the George Floyd one, for example, everybody knows it. And I sat there and I watched it and I went, what he's doing, he's probably there too long. And I know most cops agree with it. But at the same time, I go, what's happened to him? Right. You can look in his eyes and you can see there is just emptiness.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He is checked out as a human. And I'm sitting there going, man, he needed help 10 years ago. You know, he needed us to talk to him 10 years ago. You know,
more, man. That's huge that you say that, because I said the exact same thing when I was watching him in court. I'm like, this guy, he's pretty much indifferent, you know, and I don't think that he either doesn't care or just doesn't realize that he's a mess, you know, and that's a shame.
And it's a huge shame because, you know, there's so many of us out there that have gotten to that stage that just aren't asking for backup.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that one too. And I'll tell you what, man, no bullshit. Part of the reason why I left was because I knew that my mouth was going to get me in trouble, because I was getting to that point where it wasn't that I didn't care so much, but I was going to say the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time, and it was going to get me jammed up. And I knew that. So I had enough intelligence to realize, dude, I'm either going to get into another shooting, I'm not going to recover from it, or I'm going to freaking thump some dude that doesn't need to be thumped, and I'm going to get jammed up. And it's going to cost me my career or my retirement or both. You know what I mean? So,
it's so good that you can identify that as well. You know, I identified it at one stage, didn't identify that it was because of the mental stuff going on. But I remember I was on the street. I was back on the street from doing a traffic stint. I loved the traffic stint, was back on the street. That's when I went to, like, what was it? I think it was like 4 or 5 suicides and the advising job. So telling the family that's the person who passed away. And I feel those are harder than even the suicides.
Death notifications, I hate those.
They're brutal. And I remember after a couple of them, I found myself, I was arresting people for minor stuff, creating and making it a bigger thing and wanting to lay out street justice. But because my morals and that, I was like, I need to get off the street. So
that is so common that, I mean, I see it regularly. What I did when I was on the force still, I see it all the time. And I was always trying to, guide people the right direction because I'm like, look, Dan, I've been there. I mean, I was very fortunate never to get jammed up for anything, no excessive use of forces, anything like that. But I mean, I'd lose my cool on guys and start screaming at them. It's like you can't be doing that when you're in a uniform.
Yeah.
You just can't.
And I think this is so important for those that are out there that can see it in people. So, Chris, what would you say to those that are out there that can see other officers or even just family friends? Because I know we're talking a lot about police officers and that here and how to help them and that, but it also applies to civilians as well, as we call it. Because no matter if you're in that high risk type thing or if you're just in a career and you're unhappy and people are pissing you off left and right, it's the same stuff. It's just in a different area.
Right.
Police have it added on, and normally it happens a lot faster because of the trauma that our brains see, which we are not designed to see as much trauma and grief and negativity as you do as a police officer. So, what would you say to those guys and girls around? If you do see somebody that you feel like, holy cow, they're struggling, in a way that what would you say in a way so that they, that person would actually be able to hear them?
That's a difficult task at best because, of course, cops are a pain in the ass. Firefighters, nurses, they're no different either. They're all, they've got this little shell around them where and I was the exact same way. I was like, I can't be a victim. I'm out here saving the world. How can, that's not okay. So to answer your question, I think what you need to do is address it head on, just like everything else, and say, look, man, because that's what happened to me. I went down to our employee assistance unit. I was looking for somebody else. And when I was walking out the door, I said, I'm going to go find a place to hide. And for guys that knew me, they knew that I was one of those guys where I was freaking go, go, go all day, every day. I mean, I never slowed down. Even after 20 years, I was still out there chasing shit all day long. And when my buddy heard that, he's like, hang on, time out. And he maybe pulled me back in the office. And he knew that him and I weren't super close, but he knew that there was somebody else that I trusted more than him. And he said, look, man, I'm not stepping over any authority here, but I need you to talk to this person. I'm like, okay, that typical no, kind of bullshit. And I finally was convinced. I'm like, yeah, you know what? You're probably right. And I did. And that made the hugest difference in my well-being down the road. Yeah. So I think it's going to have to be somebody that either, let's say you've got one guy that's kind of ousted from the rest of the squad, or as an example, the rest of the squad gets together and they do not so much like a full-blown intervention, but they grab the most trusted guy. It doesn't have to be a supervisor. In fact, I don't necessarily recommend that anyways. Yeah. That's a whole other story. Unless it's somebody that's highly trusted. You grab the guy and you say, look, go talk to this cat and see what you can do, and just make some availability to resources, because that's what it's all about for law enforcement. It's all about the resources. We call for a call out, we call SWAT, we call canines, call helicopter. It's our resources. There's no difference between that and a guy that's struggling and in denial, because it's denial. Let's face it. I mean, I had enough maturity to realize that I was being stupid. I'm like, no, I'm fine. This is what I signed up for, which I never say, by the way, because that's bullshit. Because I'd never signed up to watch an 8-year-old hang himself or watch a kid being pulled out of a pool or whatever else. So I hope I answered your question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, you definitely did. It's all around, and it's all around that support, guys. Really support each other. Find that person that person will trust the most. You believe that he will, go talk to him. And if that doesn't work, find somebody else. Get him to talk to him. Don't give up on it. We don't give up on somebody, as first responders, we don't give up on somebody that says they're going to kill themselves. We sit there and we talk to them until we either get them down, or sadly, sometimes it doesn't happen.
Right.
But at the same time, we don't give up. Don't give up on each other either.
Well, here's not to cut you off, but here's another thing about that. If for the supervisor's role, see what happened with me was my boss just instantly pulled me off the street, and then basically, it sounds really arrogant to say it this way, and I hate saying it this way, but I got put on the desk and I was literally trying to find busy work. So I'm out in the parking lot, I'm scraping the freaking barbecue grill. This is my job. Weeks before, I just got awarded the Medal of Valor, and now I'm fucking scraping a barbecue grill. This is my job as a cop, It was insulting. It was horrible. And not only was I ousted from the rest of the squad. Now I feel like I'm this total degenerate type of guy. So as a supervisor, you got to be really careful about, just yanking guys off the street and going, "Now you're not okay. We're going to put you on the desk." If that is what policy dictates, and that's where you end up going in that direction, okay. But be really cautious about how you do that, because that's not going to help a guy that needs to be around his guys. You know what I mean?
I think this is a real key, and it leads us into my next question, which I'm real passionate about. And once I recognize it, I'm like, holy cow, I wish somebody had taught me what I teach people now, so that I could stay and force me to stay looking at it, because I believe that every person has an underlying why in their life that stems from their childhood around things. My why is I want to create less pain in people's lives, because I saw my parents, not nasty police domestic side of stuff, but they used to argue in that, and I didn't like seeing it. Also, my dad went to chiropractic school when I was a kid, so it caused, pain in me. And so I've always wanted to stop people from being in pain. Turned out, got me into law enforcement and all of that, and then what I do now, and into, financial advising now as well. And I think if supervisors are aware of people's whys, then he could apply, or the way that he talks to you, and that it could applying your why to actually taking a break and scrubbing the barbecue as a cop.
Right.
Because as cops, everybody does. You tie up your identity in it, but really it's your why that is driving you. So Chris, do you have an idea of what your why is that you've had that's driven you through life to do what you've done?
I think it's changed. I kind of joke around a little bit about how cops end up becoming cops. You've got basically the one community that's born into it. Your dad's a cop, your mom's a cop, both your parents are cops, whatever. You're kind of in that whole thing. Then you got guys that are kind of like me, where it's like, well, I don't want to be laying carpet for the rest of my life, so I'll go chase bad guys. I'll do this. Or the complete opposite side of the spectrum, where you've got guys that have either been bullied or are bullies, and they, I'm sure guaranteed is subconsciously they want to either wear the badge to be tough and get out there and this kind of stuff, or it's like, well, I've been the little man on the totem pole my whole life. Now I'm going to come back, and I'm going to come back full swing, kind of a thing. So I think for me, it changed, because it used to be, when I first got hired on, in fact, I was asked this very question, why do you want to be a cop? And my answer truly was, even to the brass then, was, I really just want to chase bad guys and drive as fast as I want and carry a gun, because I thought it would be fun. And I was right. And, over my entire career, that's exactly what it was. And of course, the bad stuff happened. And then that's where my why changed, because now it turned into, after, 3 shootings, 1 wicked gunfight, and burying 16 of my buddies in the line of duty, 16 over 20 years, plus 3 since I've retired. It's just, we buried one 2 weeks ago, I think, here. I'm in California now, but in Phoenix. But I think my why has changed now to the awareness about survival, and the survival on the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual side of law enforcement. So
I'd challenge you, Chris, that obviously the why that you found now, if you look back into and actually were, totally honest with self, did you help people? Like, obviously you went into the neighborhood team in that. Mm-hmm. Would you say that you always help people survive while you were in the place?
No, not at all. No, it was more of a, I worked in 3 different precincts, and each separate precinct, I was labeled a resident shit magnet, because I just love chasing bad guys. And the good thing was I pretty much did it right. There's a lot of stuff. I was great at catching, not so much at cleaning. But I had 2 rules for what I did. So I guess this might apply to that. The first rule was, don't violate their rights. I'm not going to sit on the stand and testify knowing full well that I violated this guy's rights. Not going to happen. Second thing is, don't hurt him unnecessarily. Former boss of mine said, hey, if the cuffs are off and you're chasing a guy and it's a fight, hey, it's kind of game on. Try to stay within policy. However, do what you got to do to survive, kind of a thing. Once the handcuffs are on, it's over. So those are my 2 rules of thumb during my entire career, and that kept me straight on the level all the way through. So I think on that level, I definitely did protect at least myself and the guys I was going after. As far as the other, my community, And my peers, that's probably a whole nother topic right there. But
Yeah. See, I can see because I do a lot of coaching around this. I can see the survive side of stuff in that, but then also, yeah, there's other little underlying things. Because my from my research, everybody does have it stems from childhood. It comes through, and it's, you know, the what we do. Some things apply to it and hit it harder than other things. Like when I first joined the police, I joined because I saw, I don't know if you heard about it, the freight train and passenger train in 2008 that collided together in LA, killed 23 people. Yeah.
yes.
So I drove past, I was on the way to my uncle's house. I was over there visiting with my wife. And I drove past that when that happened. So there was smoke and everything billowing up. We thought it might have been just a fire or that as we drove over the overpass that was just near. And yeah, driving back home, we realized what it was. And then watching the breaking news, and I was watching all the cops going in there and pulling people out. And I was like, I want to be doing that. That just looks good. Didn't recognize that it was to what you know, serving my why in that, but that what applied to it through a long time until I got lost.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
lost the focus on it.
Well, going back to the childhood question. So there was a story that I wrote in the book, and I call it Seed. And when I was 14, freshman in high school, one of my neighbors, she was in her late 60s, I think, and she tried to commit suicide. And I think she downed a bunch of pills or something. And her daughter, my neighbor, I was coming home from school, and she came out screaming, "Oh my God, my mom, help me!" And I'm like, "Dude, I'm 14 years old." And I was literally like 3 days into CPR class in health, So I'm thinking, all right, I don't know shit, but I'll, so I went in there, and long story short, I basically gave her CPR, saved her life. And, as I was writing other tales of my history, that one kind of hit me. And I'm like, wow, you know what, maybe that was a seed that was planted way back then that, I do have this kind of first responder mentality. And sure as shit, it took me, I was 26 when I finally decided to go into the community, and here we are. I won't tell you all that how it was.
Do math. People can do math, figure it out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Right.
But no, I think, my personal opinion, and from doing lots of research and coaching with people, and that, we have these things that underlie, and this is why, I think it's so important for supervisors to kind of look for this as well. What is it? Why is it that people want to actually do what they're doing? You obviously, like you said, you don't want to drive fast in that, but there's also there's an underlying subconscious thing there around the joining. The surface stuff is, yeah, fuck, I want to drive fast. I mean, any person that joins the place and doesn't say they want to drive fast, they want to, chase bad guys, and they want to, get that adrenaline rush, is lying to themselves, because it's the main part of, especially here in New Zealand, the first 2 years of being on the street, of being a cop. You're doing. But there's also, like, obviously all those underlying things. But as a supervisor, I feel, and tell me if you feel this as well, you got to identify what it is that drives somebody. Yeah. Because if they're in that shit state where you're like, I have to pull them off the street because of safety for not just others, but also them, because I care about them. But what is it that drives them, so we can even if what they're doing is not driving them as driving that why as much, or isn't feeding that why as much, they can actually still at least sit there and go, hey, and remind them, hey, look, this isn't forever. You're doing this because this is helping this person or whatever. Because most cops also join because they want to, quote unquote, help people, which I hate that answer. It annoys the crap out of me. Like, it's so surface level. Come up with something good, because you can go to the local shelter and help people.
Well, here's my take on that. And this is something I learned from my agency where, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I have some of the best bosses you can ever want to work for. I'm still close to very, very much all of them, except for a couple that I just don't, whatever, that's a whole other thing. But with what I learned from my agency was they didn't promote leaders, they promoted test takers, right? So you're a supervisor, but you're not a leader. So what I was telling guys, and this is based on what I had to face with my own bosses, was, first of all, you got to be a leader. If you're just a supervisor, great. I mean, you can check the boxes and you can fill out the overtime slips and all that shit, but I don't trust you to have my back.
Yep.
So the simplest way for me was, I've had so many of my friends that are like, dude, I can't take working with you anymore. I'm going to go get promoted so I can just get away from you, kind of thing, which isn't really true. But what I would tell those guys when they would leave and go get promoted is like, look, man, I think the number one thing that you need to learn is know as much about your people as you can. Like, let's just say, for example, and I wrote the story too, one of your guys gets into a shooting and, he chews, green Copenhagen, obviously you're not going to go give the guy a freaking shot of whiskey or whatever else. That's a whole nother thing. But if the guy chews green Copenhagen on a freaking daily basis, have somebody go get him a freaking can of dip or whatever. That's the whole thing for me. I don't really care about that, but
find the thing that he cares about and back it up so that he knows that you care.
And not only that, but you don't have to get too personal about the stuff, but know the guy's freaking family's wife's name and stuff like that. Hey, go call Kelly and let her know, kind of a thing. Or when she shows up, know who she is, and then you can go approach her and say, hey, you know what, Joe is fine. I'm gonna lead you to him, kind of a thing, or whatever it is. And if you know these kinds of things, that's gonna build a little bit more trust with your boss. And I'm hoping that'll make the difference later on when bad stuff starts to really happen and this guy's really struggling. He's going to be able to look to his boss and go, yeah, you know what, I trust you. So
yeah. Or if he's on a different squad or something like that, he'll at least, and he doesn't trust his boss, he'll be able to he'll have somebody in the department that he feels like he can go to and talk to. Right. And I think you're very right with that. With the leadership, they do, and it's everywhere. They promote people because they can take it to a test and they can pass stuff, not on their actual capabilities, what they can do. It's everywhere.
Right.
And it is, I've had some really good leaders. I've had some really shit leaders. They're a great cop. They're a great person. But as soon as they became the sergeant, like, no, what happened? It's like kryptonite to you. But yeah, it is true. I like that you brought that up because it is so true, and I talk about this a lot as the leadership side of stuff around, especially within policing, because if you have a good leader, then you have a good squad.
Yeah.
You have a productive squad, and they won't get in the shit because they're led by somebody who, will stand next to them and be like, yep, if one of my troops does something wrong, it's me. And I was talking to somebody about this who's doing some mental health stuff within the police here. And we were talking about this, and I was like, it all comes down to that leadership kind of things. The guys at the bottom have to trust that the guys above them are on their side, not against them. Right. Jocko Willix, which you probably are very familiar, you're familiar with. Jocko Willix talks about a leadership thing where he had, troops on troops shooting each other. And he was like, when his bosses from Washington came in, he's like, it was my fault. And all the SEALs were like, no, it's my fault. Everybody took ownership and leadership of it, and it's so true, is we need to have that. And I feel like there isn't a lot of that, especially in these days and age where everybody's watching their own hindsight.
Yeah. And that's a shame too, because you get a lot of guys that, they don't get into like being a field training officer or going on the team that I work for. They're climbers and they want the 5%, they want the days and weekends off, kind of a thing, and it's like, well, are you here to make a difference, or are you here for your own, personal gain? Don't get me wrong, there has to be some of that as well, but and obviously your home life family has to come first, but you still got a 40-hour family you have to take care of, whatever that looks like for you. So
yeah, I talk about this a lot. You got to take care of yourself so you can then take care of your loved ones, and then you can take care of work, and kind of do it in that order. But again, taking care of yourself sometimes is actually turning up to work and actually going, hey, I'm here full. Right. And actually, again, we go back to that mental health burnout side of stuff. You got to take care of yourself so you're not burned out, because if you're burned out, then you're not going to give a shit about the guys underneath you.
That could be more true. Could be more true. And as subordinates, if you want to call it that, as a squad, when your boss is going through stuff, it's okay for you to say, hey man, you know what? Let's take you aside and find out what's going on with you, because we need you to lead us. And some guys are afraid to do that. Where with me, I'm like, I don't give a shit. You're just because you're wearing stripes or bars. Yeah. I'm not impressed. You took a freaking test. Big deal. I answer to you, yeah, but you're still a human. But I have to respect that. You're going to take my advice on stuff. And believe me when I tell you, I've been pulled into the office so many times, and I've done that to my bosses too. Be like, hey man, you okay?
Yeah.
And they kind of look at you like, well, why are you asking? Well, because, you kind of jumped my shit for no reason, or whatever.
And I think that's a very true thing and that's that's a sign of leadership. Again, going back to that, and all of this helps you just to prevent, burning out yourself or burning out your team or burning out the squad or whatever area of work you're in. Because if you guys are working as a collective, there's no draining, there's just filling.
Yeah.
And so, you can help and you can merge and flow with the guys that aren't doing so well. You can actually pull them in and bring them back up and help them get back up. And all you do is you just keep climbing up in productivity and strength and doing even better. No, that's awesome. That's awesome, Chris. Thanks for sharing all this and that. What would be, to those that are still in, what would be your number one piece of advice to all those that are still in?
Man, that's a tough one. When I do my presentations, what I tell guys, one of the very, very first things I tell them, especially for the recruit classes, is take heed in how lucky you are to be sitting where you're sitting. Because how many of your friends have tried and failed, or they can't do it because they're, they got a bad background, or they're missing a finger, or whatever it happens to be, that they can't do this job. So you're very, very privileged to be able to wear this uniform at all, right? And so what I tell folks all the time is kind of reflect back when you're, again, I talked about this already, when you're sitting in the background investigator's office saying, I'll do whatever it takes. Remember those times when you were there thinking, my God, this is like the greatest thing ever. Because it is. It really, truly is. It's a calling that we know, because we can't be that bright if we're running into the sound of gunfire for very little money, right? I mean, come on. So you don't do it for the money. You don't do it for the glory. You do it because it's a calling. Yeah. And I see this on Facebook all the time. Guys like, I'm pissed off. I'm going to call it quits. I'm never going to let my son do this job. No. See, I think that's the wrong attitude, because, just because things aren't going well for us right now, if you give up, they're going to win. The bad guys are going to win because you quit. If you just give up, it's not going to work. And remember why you're here and enjoy what you have. Now, it's going to be bad sometimes. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I've lived through the worst of the worst, but it will get better. I promise it will get better.
I love that. And I think that is so important, is focus on the beginning. Because so many people, something happens and then they start to listen to all those cynical cops, because they're out there. We won't lie, they're not out there. Yeah, I mean, we've all. If you're talking about it, and you go on. Most cops can raise their hand and say at some point they were a cynical cop. It's a matter of remembering. Remembering the beginning. It's just like I talk to a lot of people who are on here, and I talk about it myself. Is remember what you used to enjoy when you're a kid to be happy. Because those are the same things that'll make you happy now. It's the same thing when you're in the police. Focus on the reasons you joined in the first place.
I couldn't agree more. And I've forgotten about that too. I mean, when you're in, like in my case, when I was in the worst, darkest place of my entire life and nothing was working, and I couldn't figure out why I was waking up in the middle of the night with anxiety attacks. I was like, what is going on here? I wrote it out, and then I finally started to kind of get back on the horse a little bit. And then I started to remember, this is actually a highly privileged and worthwhile career, and it's nothing to be taken lightly. So.
Yeah, no, it's so true. So Chris, I know you've written a book. You've also got a presentation that you do in that. Tell us a little bit about the book.
Well, I just happen to have a copy of it right here. So I'll see
that day comes, training for the fight. I like it. I like the title.
So I'll give you a link at the end here.
Yeah.
So the whole thing started with David Glasser, May 18, 2016, radio call, common radio call, burglary, respond. I was the first one there, and I'll spare you all the specific details on it, but I scouted a house. I was out there by myself for 13 minutes, which is a whole significant part of the story for later on. Everybody starts to, it gets rough. Everybody starts to rally, and then Dave and his partner pull up behind what ended up being the minivan, and guy sitting in the van opens fire and kills Dave. Gunfire erupts. I fired my first volley rounds out of my rifle, somewhere between 7 to 10 rounds. And that's a whole nother story as well. You think that you crank off that many rounds with the rifle, it's going to do the job. And I was a firearms instructor since 2005, rifle since 2012. So I teach guys how to do this kind of shit, right? And now I mean, I was teaching like on a shooting platform. Now I teach gunfight survival because now, I mean, I hate to say it, I've been through it now. I kind of know a little bit better. So the very first thing I did when I fired that first volley of rounds is I came off target just like this. Yeah. And so what do you think happened? The freaking dude started shooting back at me. I'm like, wait a second, that's not supposed to happen. So 3 rounds go zipping past my head. So I'm like, oh shit, what do I do now? Luckily, I was somewhat heads up. So I moved off the X, came back up and finished him off. Yeah. But the premise of that whole thing started, of course, with Dave being killed. But what I explain to people is the emotional trauma that came from that was derived from a 4.5-second gunfight where Dave was killed in front of my face. I was almost killed by the rounds because I heard and felt the rounds go past my head, and now I've got to kill my third bad guy, on the street. And in that 4.5 seconds, that one conglomeration of things happened, and that's where I got screwed up. I was like, holy cow. So that's where the book started, and then after that, it just became a lot of resiliency speak and some really funny stories about some stuff that, I joked that if I hadn't been sitting there, I never would have believed it. I'm like, oh my God, can we do that? Oh my God, it's awesome. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the beautiful part is, as of today, we got a huge plug from Dave Grossman, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who wrote a really, really great freaking forward for the book. It's going to be updated. We're going to send it back out and have it reprinted here pretty soon. That's awesome. If you guys get on Facebook under my name or get on LinkedIn under my name, you can read what he wrote, and it's just unbelievable. I'm like, holy shit, dude, you're Dave Grossman. You're writing stuff about me. I can't believe it. So
that's amazing.
So that's the book side of it. The presentation is basically the same thing, but I show a lot of the crime scene photos. I open it with the radio call of basically the shots being fired and what we refer to as an officer down, the 999. Yeah. And then I start talking about the mental preparation, obviously the physical, and then the emotional preparation before, during, and after, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And in the spiritual side of it as well. And then the tools for each one of those things to help you get through any kind of, not any, because I mean, I've only been through a few of my own things, but almost any traumatic event that you're going to be facing, just taking those things on board and figuring out ways to get through those things. You know what I mean? So
that's awesome, Chris. That's epic. Thanks for doing that as well for people, because it's huge. That's a huge thing that people don't realize. And after I'm going to get you here to tell us how people get that book and how people can get in touch with you. But then I'm going to have one question that isn't on our list that I've got to ask, because I think a lot of people will get a lot out of it, especially after you being involved in so much stuff. So Chris, how do people, one, get the book, and how do they get in touch with you if they want to chat with you and maybe even?
You're welcome to post my email. It's my first last name, Chris Hoyer 46 @gmail. Cool. And I please welcome any kind of debates, or you're full of shit or whatever. I want to hear all that. I swear I do, because I kind of still feel like I'm just some 2-year rookie. I don't know jack shit. Yeah. So I want all the feedback, and I want to know what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, more, so I can be better for other folks as well. So awesome. So Chris Hoyer 46 @gmail. The book is on Amazon and Kindle, and cool. You can go to pretty much any bookstore, Barnes and Noble, Walmart, all these places, and you can actually order it there. It's not on their shelves, which I'm still working on that whole thing, but yeah. And it's going to be coming out on audio, I'm hoping within a month. The guy that's doing it for us is up to 37 out of 49 chapters, so he's almost done with that. So
I'm looking forward to that, because I mostly do audiobooks. So I actually listen to audiobooks on my way to work on the motorcycle with my.
That's I never thought about that, really, to be honest with you, because I always thought having a thing in my hand was, I'm like that old school guy. I want to have it in my hand, but getting into the market, and this thing was never designed to be a moneymaker, and I still don't care about that one bit. That's got nothing to do with it. If it becomes a bestseller, great, fine, whatever. I don't really care. The whole point of the story is, first of all, to remember Dave, and to dedicate all what he gave his life for, and to have awareness for our community, not necessarily just for the law enforcement community, but the first responder community as a whole, and their families as well. So people can realize, the daily traumas and the stresses that you're going to see on a daily basis, so.
And it's so awesome that you've done that, because it is, especially in these day and age, with so much stuff going on and that in the world, is, it needs to be, that awareness does need to get out there. So Chris, I have to ask, because I think you're probably one of the first guys that I've talked to that's open about, the shooting, they're, having to take somebody else's life in that. Can you walk viewers through what goes through your head before it? Because I know there's so much stuff out there that naive people that aren't in law enforcement, don't know law enforcement, that go, oh, obviously there's a whole thing of, why don't you just shoot them in the hand, or that. We won't get into that because that's just not worth the time.
Right.
But the thought of, they're like, so many people think, oh, cops just will do it blasé and that. Can you walk me through, especially that, I guess that first shooting was a dog, you said, was a canine. Let's go the first human, because I know canines are a special thing, especially I've got 2 dogs. I'm very close to, dogs, but a human, I think taking another life is just something completely different. Would you mind walking us through kind of that, so viewers understand from from the horse's mouth as such, what actually goes through your head and what it's, what it does?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will tell you the best way to prepare for this is something that I learned on my own. It was something I was never taught, is playing the what if game, and when it came to a deadly force confrontation for me back in 2000, it was when my first actual shooting happened. I had played the what if game for the year, 2.5, 2 years, whatever it was I was on. And so when the use of force continuum happened, it goes from, officer presence to verbal, thing or whatever. And then it escalates from there. And so I went through that continuum in about 1 second. And then it was like, now it's go time. And the simple part for me was that it was a reaction to what he did, if that makes sense. So long story short, basically the guy's in a car, he's trying to steal his car. He's got a big knife and he's cracking the column of the car. And I kicked the window of the car and the glass shattered, and he came up and he brought the gun. He got it to about here, almost eye level. And I recognized that he's getting ready to shoot me. So I shot him first. So that's just a reaction to what he did. Side note to that whole thing, for our snipers, God bless those guys. That's not something I think I could handle quite as well, because you're pretty much going on a hunting excursion at that point in time. Now, obviously, we know why they do it. They're going to save 100 other lives by taking this one guy down. And chances are that guy needs to be gone 40 times anyway, so nobody really care. I mean, no, you would care, of course, but so the reaction is what settled my nerves, and I never really had any bad dreams on the first or the second one. The second one was a rifle shooting, whole nother long story. The guy was tearing up the city, and we had 5 officers involved on that one as well. First officer was collided head on, and he cranked off a rifle round through his windshield. I put 9 rifle rounds through the guy's door as he's driving by us. And the same thing, it was a reaction, because if I don't stop him from what he's doing, he's going to kill somebody, or he's going to really seriously hurt somebody. And so it was a little bit more, and everything that I dealt with, like I talked about, almost shot a dog, and then shot a dog, and then almost, and then shot a bad guy, and then almost, and then it's a rifle, and then it turned into the rifle gunfight.
Yeah.
Same thing here, where it was, the first shooting was like 0.2 of a reaction. Oh shit, bang, bang, kind of a thing. Yeah. None of this front sight picture, smooth trigger press, all that. It's more like close my eyes and screaming for my mom, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
The second one was a little bit more calculated, because I saw him coming. I poised myself. I got ready. Came up, finger on the trigger, and cranked off those rounds. So that was more of a planned event. And then you fast forward to the third guy, where now it is, unfortunately, and I got to say this too, I had been preconditioned for shootings. Okay. The target turns, you raise and fire 2 rounds, whatever it is. Now, when you do that and it doesn't work, then you realize that this is no longer a shooting. Now it's a gunfight. And that for me was my biggest fear all the way through my entire career, was getting into a gunfight. And miraculously, somehow I survived it, which is another long story, because I truly believe that Dave, after he was killed, stood up and said, nope, we're done. I'm going to protect the rest of you guys on this scene, including myself. And that's how I was able to finish the job, if you will.
Yeah.
But that one was a little bit more difficult for me, because I came so close to dying myself.
Yeah.
And for guys that understand, I know you because you're a rifle guy. So I've got my aim point reticle. It's just a little red dot. It's not magnified. And that first volley of rounds, I didn't see that dot at all. I didn't see the front sight. I didn't see anything. It was kind of come up on target, and it was like,
yeah.
I mean, and again, I was an instructor, so I kind of had an idea what to do, if you will.
The sphincter is going all fine motor skills. This is why my dad used to train me to take me to the range all the time, and he bought me a pistol here. Even though like to own a pistol is quite difficult. He already had his pistol license here, and so he bought one, and then I'd go to the range with him and shoot it because he's like, your fine motor skills disappear as soon as that sphincter goes. You start getting shot.
Absolutely.
Everything you've learned goes out the window, and it becomes muscle memory.
Well, it's funny you say that, because then that second volley, when I came up, that dot was about that big. It was huge, and I equate that to rage, because I said it. I'm like, oh, you just tried to kill me. Now it's going to be go time. Yeah. And I came back and ended up being a total of 22 rounds that I put into this guy's car, put him down. Yeah. But the really, really strange part that people need to recognize, and I'll talk about this a little bit at the end here, are triggers. But one of the things that happened to me on that whole thing, and now we all understand auditory exclusion and your fine motor skills and all the blood goes to your heart. People don't realize that's because that's where the biggest protection needs to be, right? So that's why you lose your fine motor skills with your fingers and your toes. Some of your other senses get heightened. Like in my case, my hearing was heightened beyond anything else, because 22 rifle rounds, 2 separate volleys, I didn't hear one single round go off, not one. 151 decibel rifle with no hearing protection, not one round. But I could hear my brass hitting the ground and hear the guy's glass from 35 yards away from his car hitting the ground. Now, how in the hell do you explain that, right? So I started doing some serious research, talking to clinical guys and doctors and SWAT guys and anybody else that would answer my questions. And nobody gave me the correct answer except for my, at the time, wife. She said, that's what your brain needed to know at the time. And I'm like,
yeah, it is. It's so true. It's so true. Chris, I want to pull back to that first shooting that you had. And obviously, I know and I'm doing this more for not so much myself, but for listeners, because I know there's a lot of people out there that know nothing about law enforcement. And I just want to clear some things up for some people in that. And that's why we're continuing on this and going a little bit longer than we normally would. That first shooting, obviously the guy had a big knife going into the thing. Did you see the knife before you rocked up on the car?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So you'd seen it. It
was about this big.
Yeah. So seeing the knife, he's in there, it's there. So cool. Obviously. So for those that aren't familiar with law enforcement, that's a deadly weapon. Of course, you're going to have pistol, handgun out as you approach the guy and get him to do stuff. At what stage did you know that he had a pistol?
Well, when the call came out, I knew that he was last seen running through the neighborhood with a gun. So I assumed,
had insight. Yeah.
Right. I assumed that he was still armed with the gun, and he'd been in one stolen car, made his way to another car and was in that car, and he was using that. It was basically an 8-inch straight slotted throwing knife, and he was cracking the column of this other car, trying to get the ignition to manipulate. And so, going back to that use of force continuum, it's like, well, nobody knows where I'm at, because I was still kind of new. I didn't really put myself where I was supposed to be on the radio. And my car was on one side of the building, bad guys on the other side. I know he's armed with a knife, so I'm not going to just open the door of the car. And I assume he's armed with a gun, and I'm not going to expose myself, although I had no cover. It was basically just me and him. And I'm in uniform, and I'm pointing my gun right at him through the window of the car, and he's looking up at me like, yeah, okay, whatever. Keeps on doing what he's doing. Could care less that I was there. So trying to be smart, I thought, well, I can't do this or this or this or this. So what I'll do is I'll try to create a diversion, which I'd like to think is forward thinking, but it really wasn't. It was more just, oh shit, what else can I do? So I ended up kicking the window of the car. And being at the time, recently graduated 2 years, I was like 145 pounds. So, and we're talking about a GM car and an old Cadillac. It wasn't going to happen. Kicked it with my left foot, didn't work. I went back to the back of the car and kind of regrouped, came back to the front of the car again, kicked it again, and I'm giving him commands, which is a whole nother story, because after like 2 or 3 commands, the guy's not going to do what you do. Don't tell the guy to drop the knife 400 freaking times. He ain't going to drop the knife, move on to something else, start negotiating.
And this is real good information for people that are listening that don't understand, is this is all the stuff that is going through your head at this time, right, while you're thinking all this stuff. And Yeah. So sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No worries. Just for background, we didn't know this at the time, but he was wanted on 3 felony warrants of pulling a sawed-off shotgun on my field training officer a year before this. And he was in a stolen car, had just run from the cops, had the gun was stolen as well. So this guy's a pretty heavy hitter. He's a pretty violent guy, right? And so that third go around, I come back up and now I can hear the car starting to crank. And I'm like, I got to do something. I can't just let this guy get away. So came back up and I was trying to avoid blowing my toe off with my gun. That's why I was kicking with my left foot. Came back up for that third go around. The glass shatters. And basically what happens is he's got the knife in his left hand. The knife gets thrown down to the floorboard of the car. It reaches down beside him on the seat, which is where I couldn't see where the gun was. Gun comes up again to about eye level. And, I cranked off those 2 rounds.
At what stage were you able to actually go, fuck, that's a gun?
Probably, well, I illustrated in such a way that it was probably in no bullshit about 0.2 of a second when I saw it, when I went ahead and engaged the trigger on my gun. So I have a model that I do, and I hold a pen up to my nose about eye level, and I drop it to the floor. And the time it takes that thing to hit the floor is about how much time you've got to make that deadly force decision.
And I want to reiterate this for the listeners, because I don't think people actually realize this so much. Some of our listeners might, but that is how fast you have a decision of, am I going to take someone else's life, or possibly take someone else's life, or go, okay, it could be my life.
Right.
And it's real important for people to understand that, because in that 0.2 of a second, tell me if I'm wrong, but what went through your head? Was it, I want to kill this guy, or fuck, I have to kill this guy?
Well, it was one of those things where, and I was no Superman, walking around pounding my chest. It was like, I got to make it home. I can't lose. If I lose, my daughter's going to be raised by my wife, by herself, and if you have that thought process of, oh, well, maybe, you're going to cause hesitation, you're going to get hurt, somebody else is going to get hurt, bad guy's going to get away, and he's going to create more carnage, like the guy, the first rifle shooting. If this guy gets away, somebody's going to die, somebody's going to get killed. It's my responsibility to take this guy down.
Yeah.
And just to go to your point, though, joking about, shooting him in the hand or shoot him in the leg or shoot the knife out of his hand. Well, I'll tell you that with all of the training that I had already been through, and all the range time and blah, 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 the whole thing, from 3 feet away, I missed 1 out of 2 rounds, And so what does that tell you? From 3 feet away, and the guy's sitting right there. And I mean, I was a decent shot. I mean, I can kind of hold my own, if you will. And I still missed 1 of the 2 rounds. So, And
it's a real important thing. And I'm glad, Chris, thanks for having this conversation with us, so that the listeners can hear it, because it's so important for people to realize this. And I'm not saying all shootings are good or all shootings are bad or anything like that. I'm not, there have been bad shootings. And, but again, at the same time, in that split second, you have to decide.
Right.
You have to make, and all of this stuff goes through your head. And, it used to wind me up so bad when people would say around these American shootings and that, because luckily we don't have that many here, but all these shootings, and I'd be like, you have no idea what's going through their mind, the cop's mind at the time. He does not want to pull that trigger. That's why it takes him so long to actually get the guy to do it. Like you said, you can't tell him 400 times to do something, because after about 10 times, he ain't going to do it. Unless you're really lucky. But there's that 0.2 of a second, like you said. And as you said, you missed 1 out of 2 shots.
Right. And believe me when I tell you, I mean, that was the last thing I wanted to do. And then I'll tell you exactly one thing that I knew, in the classroom, and this is what I teach. It's like, I want people to learn what I can teach in the classroom in a controlled setting, not on the street like I learned most of my stuff, most of my tactics and stuff. Because what do you think the very first thing we did after I ended up having to shoot this guy? We pull him out of the car. Now I've got to give him CPR.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, the guy literally just tried to kill me, and now I've got to save his life.
Yeah.
And I don't really have a problem with that. I mean, you do have this kind of like with the last one with Dave's deal, there was some question of vendetta in my mind. I'm not going to lie, because of what you see, what you just went through.
Yeah.
But I didn't take that final shot, if you will, where I could have easily, I wanted to take that final execution shot, and I didn't do it because of a whole nother list of reasons.
Your morals are too big.
Well,
you a career for a specific reason, and even though you might at the time consciously be fighting those, subconsciously that actually outweigh outweigh the doing. That's why, like you said, you got to a lot of stages where you felt like you were gonna do things that you shouldn't, but you never did.
Right. And I'll tell you exactly why for guys that may be in a situation, and this is what worked for me. It may not work for everybody else, but the number one reason why I didn't, because I knew I couldn't answer to my God. I knew that taking that shot was not going to be okay. Second half of that was I knew I wasn't going to be able to justify that to my bosses, to the brass, because I know they're going to come out there and investigate this whole entire thing. So Hoyer, why did you take that last shot? The guy's obviously dead. Well, because I was pissed off because he tried to kill me and he killed Dave.
Yeah,
justify. It's not going to work. So.
And I just wanted, and again, Chris, thanks for going through this conversation, because I know it can bring old things up, but two, obviously it's one of those, conversations that I can guarantee, I bet somebody's going to hear it and they're going to take it out of proportion or whatever is going to probably happen, because it always does. But at the same time, you've just heard it from a guy who has had to, not got to, not chose to, but had to shoot 3 people.
Right. And that's nothing to be taken lightly, believe me when I say it.
No.
And it was I would say not the most difficult thing I've ever had to deal with, but taking a life is nothing to be taken lightly by any means. And what I try to justify for guys that have either been through it or are struggling and or maybe going through it was, this wasn't a decision that I made. This was a decision that this guy made all by himself, that he knew what was coming, and he still wanted to push the envelope and basically back us into a corner, like almost literally, and make us. And we all know that there's suicide by cop, and I believe that the very final one that's exactly what he told his dad on the phone. It was going to be a shootout with the cops, and he's looking for a gunfight. So that was suicide by cop, 100%. The middle shooting, that one was also suicide by cop, which is a whole other long story. The first one I'm not so sure about. I think the guy just thought he had a superior upper hand over me, and probably looking at me going, whatever, I'm not impressed with you, kind of a thing, and I can do whatever I want. And unfortunately, all 3 were very traumatic, because it's hard to be a survivor on some of these things, especially with Dave, when Dave was killed, and now I'm still here. Dave was shot at 3 times and it hit twice. I was shot at 3 times and survived. So it's like, well, shit, now I've got to deal with that whole thing, and which is that's a whole like 4 chapters in the book that I talk about. So.
No, it sounds like it's definitely a book to read, or once it's out on audio, I'll definitely be grabbing it and listening to it on audio, because it sounds definitely like it's a must read and listen to. So again, Chris, thanks so much for being here today. Thanks for going into stuff in detail, and spending some extra time. For listeners in that, if you're still with us, take the one things out of this, listen to it again, share it around, but just go back and take one thing out of it. I mean, you've just listened to a cop of 20 years who's gone through and puts his hands up and says, I needed help and I got help, and these are the things that I did. And you can apply it to anything that you're doing. If you're not a first responder, you can apply it to any area of your life, whether you're working corporate, whether you at the gas station, or you're at the grocery store, whatever it is, you can apply it to your life, because they're the same things that everybody goes through. It's just at different levels and states. So again, at Fight the Burnout, we thank you for listening. You can always reach out to us. All Chris's details will be in the comments in the description below. And you can always reach out to us, as at fighttheburnouttpodcast@gmail.com. And we'll be happy to get on the phone or have a conversation with you and just give you some tools and that we can, or if we don't know them, we'll find somebody that can help. So till next time, remember, share this out to anybody that that is going to enjoy it. And until next time, we'll talk to you soon. And thanks for listening.